Hello and welcome to the celebration of Major Jim Park's 100th birthday. It's being held on October 16th, 2024. We're located today in the Newmarket Canadian Legion, and we'd like to welcome 50 special guests. These guests are from our York region. We have the mayors of the area. We have our local MPs and the local MPPs, and a special welcome to our first responders and all those associated with Jim and his life in the last 100 years or so. And to talk a little bit about Jim's life today, we have Dave Elms, the membership chair of the Newmarket Men's Provost Club. Dave has spent 33 years in a teaching career in Ontario. His background is in science and education with degrees from local universities. Most of his career he has spent with the Toronto District School Board, and academics is certainly in his life because Sherry, his wife, is also a principal in the Newmarket schooling system. Dave is also a two-time past president of the MG Club in Ontario. He has four MGs himself. One he just completed from, as we like to retell them, from a bucket of bolts. So without further ado, we're over to Dave to talk a little about Jim and Jim's life.
Major Parks, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, my longtime friend and our Probus historian, Douglas Wrigglesworth, was supposed to present this short This Is Your Life. His recent health issues have made that not possible at this time. Now it's conscripted to take over. I offer my sincere appreciation to Doug for providing me with the majority of this presentation and a speedy recovery. I also thank Crystal, David, and Mike Parks for their last-minute help in my research on this project. In advance, please forgive any errors and facts that I make during this presentation. Major Joseph James Parks, this is your life. November 11th, 1918 was the end of the war to end all wars. 6 years later, on Tuesday, September the 22nd, 1924, little Jimmy Parks was born to Amy Louise, nee Rogers, and George Alfred Parks in Winnipeg, Manitoba. The Roaring Twenties had many achievements besides the birth of baby Jimmy. The same year, the first cheeseburger was sold in Pasadena, California. Public black and white television broadcast wouldn't happen until 2 years later. On May 20th to 21st, 1927, Charles Lindbergh made his first nonstop flight from New York City to Paris, a distance of 5,800 kilometers, flying alone for 33 and a half hours in his aircraft, the Spirit of St. Louis. The world experienced the first talking pictures, The Jazz Singer, in October of that year. It's perhaps hard to realize that Jim was born before the 1928 discovery of penicillin. Little Jimmy was not too concerned when shortly after his 5th birthday, Black Tuesday occurred, the crash of the stock market and the beginning of a global recession. Nor as a 9-year-old did he care that Adolf Hitler had been democratically voted into office. The German political landscape was dramatically affected by the 1929 Wall Street crash, which hampered economic aid to Germany. The Great Depression brought the global economy to a halt and further polarized German politics. On January 30th, 1933, German President von Hindenburg formally appointed Adolf Hitler as Germany's new chancellor. We all know what resulted 6 years later. A typical young lad, Jim Parks grew up with his 3 siblings and 4 much older half-siblings, playing games like cowboys and Indians, or his preference, military soldier. He's very close to his brother Jack, who was only 15 months older than Jim. Crystal Parks told me that this was the dirty 30s. Just look at these two. Mike Parks wrote to say, Jim and Jack always hung out, like Heckle and Jekyll. They grew up in Winnipeg on Lizzie Avenue by the tracks. They used to tease the driver of the coal wagon so he would throw chunks of coal at them. The kids would pick it up and bring it home to heat the house. Another side story from David Parks. Growing up in Winnipeg, my dad had an adventure with his brother when he was 13. and they both boarded a freight train to Vancouver on top of a boxcar. He said he almost thought he was going to die when they went through the tunnels, and all the smoke from the steam engine almost choked them to death. The story continues from Mike Parks. So the boys tried to join the infantry. They arrived at a recruitment center located at the Seafood Armories in Vancouver. The officer on duty was wise to them. They were tossed out, as they were obviously too young. They thought it would be a good idea to head south to California. They spent the night, September the 22nd, Jim's birthday, next to the border, sleeping in a barn after doing chores for the farmer. After walking to Bellingham, some 20 miles to the south, they were recognized and promptly picked up as aliens of the U.S. and sent to a multi-story detention center in Seattle. There they were holed up for 2 months before being sent home by boat, first to Vancouver and then by train to Winnipeg. Jim didn't find schooling very interesting, no doubt probably gifted and thus bored with the educational system at the time. Jim just wanted to grow up and fast. In 1934, when he was 10 years old, Jim joined the Royal Canadian Army Cadets. The motto of Asa Asapori is Latin for "As the maple, so the sapling." It's worn on the upper sleeve of the cadet uniform and on the breast of the issued parkas. Jim joined the Cameron Highlanders regular forces. One afternoon, according to Mike Parks, Jack came over to tell Jim that he got the weekend off. Hitch was that he and Jack had transferred to the Royal Winnipeg Rifles and were heading out Monday morning to Camp Debeur, Nova Scotia. About 70% of enlistees in 1940 were in the early teens or early 20s, and many were underage. Jim lied about his own age to join the Army, claiming to be 18 when he was actually 15. And because his friends were joining up, he acquired some fake identification and went to sign up. Jim went to join up. Sergeant Jones knew me. He'd been my sergeant in the cadets and military, he said. Well, that's okay. I dreamed of enlisting and mostly seeing the sights of England. I thought of adventure, not realizing the danger involved. Well, along with my brother, we joined the Army in Winnipeg. Shipped off to England for military training and training and training. Little did they know that if Germany had continued west after taking France and crossed over the English Channel, the Nazis would have won the war. The British Home Guard had no firearms. They were training with broomsticks over their shoulders. On June the 6th, 1944, after months of careful planning, Allied forces under the command of United States General Dwight D. Eisenhower launched Operation Overlord, the invasion of Western Europe, which had suffered under Nazi occupation for 4 years. Faced with such obstacles as well battle-hardened German forces led by the legendary General Erwin Rommel, the Allies decided that surprise would be their greatest weapon. The Germans knew an invasion was coming, but not when or where. Here's our hero, Jim. England was not an adventure or a holiday as he'd originally thought or hoped for, and the worst was yet to come. D-Day, June 6, 1944. The invasion began shortly after midnight on the morning of June 6, with an extensive aerial and naval bombardment, as well as an airborne assault. The landing of 24,000 American, British, and Canadian airborne troops. The early morning aerial assault was soon followed by Allied amphibious landings on the coast of France. Although they weren't on the same landing craft, Jack and Jim Parks, members of the Winnipeg Rifles, were among the first wave of Canadian soldiers to land at Juneau 2 minutes before the main assault wave hit. Jim's boat was struck by the Germans as heavy machine guns fired on them, forcing him to jump into the water, ditch his gear, and swim to shore. The men landed on a heavy fire from gun emplacements overlooking the beaches, and the shore was mined and covered with obstacles such as wooden stakes, metal tripods, and barbed wire, making it difficult and dangerous to proceed. They were among roughly 14,000 Canadians who landed at Juneau Beach on D-Day, joining the more than 150,000 Allied troops who fought their way ashore on 5 beaches in Normandy that day. Some 359 Canadian soldiers died on D-Day, and more than 800 were wounded. German casualties on D-Day have been estimated at 4,000 to 9,000 men. Allied casualties were at least 10,000, with 4,414 confirmed dead. After safely swimming to shore, Jim took a rifle off of the body of a friend of his who'd been shot dead and continued up the shore. Here is an excerpt from the book Little Black Devils, A History of the Royal Winnipeg Rifles by Bruce Tascona and Eric Wells. Bloody fighting raged all along the beaches. On the right, the Winnipegs had to battle their way past 5 major concrete casements and 15 machine gun positions set in the dunes, commanding a long sweep of the beach. From dune to dune, along the German trench systems and through the tunnels, these Manitoba troops fought every yard of the way. They broke into the casements, ferreted out the gun crews with machine guns, grenades, bayonets, and knives. Canadians ran into crossfire. They were shelled and mortared even in the German positions, but they kept slugging away at the enemy. After a struggle that was bitter and savage, the Winnipegs broke through into the open country behind the beach. Jim stormed the Juno Beach on D-Day, went on to further battles through France and into the Netherlands, including the Battle of Puteaux and the Battle of Carpiquet, just to name 2 of the many. Jim was wounded in Dalziel and a shrapnel in his leg that he lives with to this day, as it was too close to the main artery to be removed. Both he and his brother survived the war. I won't go any deeper in Jim's service record, as much of it is written down in the flyer on your table that Probus members Bill Kidd and I wrote and produced. David Parks emailed me to say, my dad's older brother was Jack. He also joined the Winnipeg Rifles and landed on D-Day and survived the war and continued his life in the Army. Dad had a younger brother, Ted, who joined the RCAF and spent his life in it and retired. His younger sister was named Joan. Jim also had a half-brother named Godfrey, who was a cook in the World War II and was wounded, but survived the war. He also had a half-brother who immigrated to the States and joined the Marines. He was maybe 20 years older than Jim, so he never really knew him. As Jim was born and grew up in Winnipeg, he came back there after the war and joined the Winnipeg Fire Department for 5 years. He then moved on to federal government Veterans Affairs for about 12 years. Next as a draftsman for Vulcan Engineering Company. Then to the Unemployment Commission, which transitioned to Canada Manpower Department. As he'd been 15 when he joined the active service, it was after the war that Jim continued to improve his education both full-time and part-time. He's taken courses at the University of Winnipeg, Carleton University, and Ryerson, when it was Ryerson. Jim joined the Army Reserves after the war. He volunteered to go and serve his country again in the war between North and South Korea. By the time his training was complete, the war was over, so he was not commissioned to the Far East. Still with the reserves, Jim worked his way up the chain of command to military retirement in 1964 as a major. Jim worked with the federal government in various administrative and managerial positions, Veterans Affairs, Department of Finance and Employment, Insurance. Eventually retired at 63 as a manager in Waterloo, Ontario in 1987. Jim's been involved with the Memory Project, where veterans make themselves available to attend schools to share their experiences of World War II. He's probably presented in front of thousands of high school and elementary school kids over the course of 25 or more years. He's spoken to people all over the world via the internet about his experiences, many of them school kids doing research projects and just for personal interest. He also received letters from Europe from school-aged children. For a number of years, Jim has been invited to the Netherlands to help celebrate Victory in Europe and Liberation Day events, which include community and school programs. He's been an active participant in many of the Juno Beach projects. Back to the Netherlands, he celebrated the 80th anniversary, where a class of Dutch students prepared personal souvenirs for Jim. There's a Second World War documentary being produced in France entitled Little Black Devils from Juno Beach to Puteaux, depicted the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, a regiment that will tell the story from the days leading up to D-Day through to their battle with the German SS Panzer Division near the French village of Puteaux. This is a picture of Jim next to Marceau Lollier, the actor who portrayed him in the film, from a CBC press release. Leading the charge in the film was the late Frederick Jean, who was particularly passionate about the role of the Canadian troops who liberated his home village in Normandy. Filmmakers have also collaborated with one of the Canadians who stormed Juno Beach on D-Day, Jim Parks, who lied about his age to join the Winnipeg Rifles with his brother. Parks and Jean first met more than a decade ago and were in frequent communications both remotely and in visits on both sides of the Atlantic. I'm unsure when the film will be available here in Canada. In conclusion, back to Jim. Jim married Genevieve in 1953. Mike Park tells me that Jack and Jim's army buddy, Larry Salisbury, ended up marrying Genevieve's sister, Donna. Both Donna and Genevieve were from big prairie families, of whom most of the brothers were in the war and came back. Mike says that I should ask Jim about the rabbit and the rifle caper in the hills of Scotland, where Larry got caught by the sheriff. Jim and Genevieve had 4 children, 3 sons, Michael, David, and Jeffrey, and 1 daughter, Crystal, and 2 grandchildren, Andrew and Katie. Thank you, Crystal, for this beautiful photograph. Thank you, Jim. I'm proud to be able to call you my friend. Thank you.